I heard her crying through the wall late at night, and for the first time, I didn't pretend it wasn't my place. I stood in front of her door, unsure if a single knock could change anything. When she opened it, I realized this wasn't just about being neighbors anymore. Some moments don't ask for courage, they demand a choice. Hello, my name is Arthur. I am 32 years old, and I live alone in a regular apartment building in a quiet part of the city. I work delivering furniture and assembling it in people's homes. Wardrobes, beds, tables, sofas. I carry heavy boxes, tighten screws, make sure everything stands straight and solid. It is not a glamorous job, but it is honest work, and it pays my bills. At the end of the day, my hands are tired, my back aches, and I usually just want silence. I have lived in this building for a little over 4 years. Same apartment, same floor, same routine. I know the sound of the elevator, the way the hallway smells in the evening, the exact moment the heating turns on in winter. It is a simple life, but it is stable. I never planned much beyond work and rest. Until I met her. Her name is Delia. She is 30 years old and works as a manager. I never asked exactly where at first. It did not matter. What mattered was how she spoke, calm and polite, and how she always looked like she was thinking about 10 things at once. She lives in the apartment next to mine. We met the first week she moved in, when she struggled with grocery bags, and I offered to help. From that day on, we became neighbors in the best sense of the word. Not strangers sharing a wall, but people who noticed each other. We greeted each other in the mornings. We talked for a few minutes in the hallway after work. Sometimes we stood by the entrance with coffee from the small shop across the street. Nothing special, nothing forced. Just natural conversations about work, weather, daily life. Delia was always pleasant. She listened when I spoke. She laughed easily, but never loudly. She thanked me for small things like holding the door or carrying a box upstairs. I helped her once with a loose shelf in her kitchen, and she insisted on making me tea. We sat at her table and talked about work stress and how hard it is to relax after a long day. That was it. No tension, no flirting, just two neighbors being kind to each other. Over time, I noticed how consistent she was. Always polite, always calm. Even when she looked tired, she never complained much. She never spoke badly about anyone, especially not about her personal life. And that was something I noticed more and more. Sometimes a man came to visit her. Not often. I would see him in the hallway or hear the door close late in the evening. He never stayed long. Delia never mentioned him. Not once. If the conversation came close to relationships or weekends, she would gently shift the topic. Ask me about my job. About a delivery I mentioned before. About the building. It was subtle, but clear. I respected that. Everyone has a right to privacy. I did not ask questions. I did not make assumptions. Still, I could not ignore how different she seemed after those visits. Quieter. More distant for a day or two. Then back to her normal self. Our neighborly relationship stayed the same on the surface. We helped each other with small things. We shared smiles. We stood a little longer in the hallway than necessary. Sometimes she knocked on my door to ask if I had spare batteries or a tool. Sometimes I asked her to hold a package for me when I was late. Simple things. But slowly, without any clear moment, I realized I was looking forward to seeing her. I noticed her steps outside my door. I noticed when her lights were still on late. I noticed when she was not home. I told myself it meant nothing. She was just my neighbor. A good one. And that was enough. At least, that is what I thought. One evening, after a long day of deliveries, I came home exhausted. I dropped my bag by the door and sat down, letting the silence settle. That was when I heard her voice through the wall. She was on the phone. At first, I did not listen. Then I heard her raise her voice. Not in anger, but in pain. Words came fast, broken, mixed with tears. I could not make out everything, but I understood enough. She was hurting. Then, suddenly, the call ended. Silence followed. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. I sat there, staring at the wall between our apartments. I told myself it was not my place. That neighbors do not interfere. That she would be fine. But something inside me refused to stay quiet. I stood up, walked to the door, and paused. My hand hovered in the air. Then I knocked. The door opened slowly. Delia stood there, eyes red, face tired, shoulders tense. For a moment, neither of us spoke. And then she looked at me and said quietly, with no surprise in her voice, that she had been waiting for me. I did not step inside her apartment right away. I stood there for a moment, unsure of where the line was, unsure if I was crossing it. Delia moved first. She stepped aside and opened the door wider, silently inviting me in. Her apartment looked almost the same as mine, just mirrored. Simple furniture, warm light, a quiet feeling. She closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a second, as if holding herself together. I asked if she was okay. It was a simple question, maybe even a useless one, but it was the only thing that felt right. She nodded, then shook her head, then sighed. She said she did not know how to answer that. We sat down at her small kitchen table. I did not touch her. I did not rush. I just sat there, present. She told me she had been arguing with her boyfriend. Not for the first time. She said the call had started calmly, then slowly turned into something heavy and painful, like it always did. She explained that they had been together for a while, but things never felt steady. Promises were made and broken. Plans were discussed and avoided. She said she often felt like she was asking for too much, even though she was only asking to be heard. I listened. I did not interrupt. I did not offer advice. I only nodded when she spoke, letting her know I was there. At some point she stopped talking and looked at her hands. Her voice became quieter. She admitted that she never talked about him to me on purpose. Not because she was hiding something, but because saying it out loud made everything feel real, and she was not sure she was ready for that. She said that when she spoke to me in the hallway, when we laughed about small things, when life felt simple, she did not want to bring that complicated part of her life into it. I understood that, more than I expected to. I told her about myself, about how my life was mostly work and rest, about how I never really talked about relationships either, because there was not much to talk about. I had dated before, but nothing that stayed. I told her I liked things that were clear and honest, even if they were not perfect. She smiled softly when I said that. That night did not turn into anything dramatic. No sudden confessions. No big moments. I stayed for a while, until her breathing slowed and her shoulders relaxed. Before I left, she thanked me for knocking. Not for helping, not for fixing anything, just for knocking. The next days felt different. Not uncomfortable, but changed. When we met in the hallway, there was a new awareness between us. We talked the same way, but listened more closely. When she smiled, it stayed a little longer. When she asked how my day was, she really waited for the answer. She did not mention her boyfriend again. I did not ask, but I noticed that he stopped coming over. The hallway stayed quiet. The door next to mine stayed closed in the evenings. Instead, sometimes Delia and I would walk outside together after work, just around the block, just for air. Our conversations became deeper without forcing it. She talked about her job as a manager, about the pressure of always being responsible, always expected to stay calm. I talked about my work, about how people assume physical jobs mean simple minds, and how wrong that is. We laughed about small misunderstandings. We shared silence without needing to fill it. One evening, she asked if I wanted to have dinner together. Not out, not anything special, just at her place. We cooked something simple. We made mistakes. We laughed when the pasta was overcooked. It felt natural, like something that should have happened a long time ago. At some point, she told me she had ended things with her boyfriend. Not because of me, she made that clear, but because that phone call had shown her how tired she was of explaining herself. She said she wanted peace more than promises. I respected that. I told her she did the right thing for herself. As weeks passed, our time together increased. Slowly, carefully. We did not rush into labels. We did not pretend it was more than it was. But there was warmth, comfort, trust. When she leaned her head on my shoulder for the first time, it did not feel like a surprise. It felt like a continuation. I realized something important during that time. I was not trying to save her. I was not stepping in to fix a broken situation like I fixed furniture for a living. I was simply standing next to her, and she was doing the same for me. And somewhere between shared dinners, quiet walks, and late conversations, the wall between our apartments stopped feeling like a boundary. It became just a wall. After Delia ended things with her boyfriend, there was no dramatic fallout. No shouting in the hallway, no late-night knocking, no scenes like in movies. Real life was quieter than that. It was mostly small moments that added up. The first change was simple. Delia started sleeping better. I noticed it in her face. The tired look around her eyes softened. She still had stressful days at work, but she didn't carry that same heaviness home. When we met in the hallway, she didn't look like she was bracing for something. The second change was in me. I stopped pretending I didn't care. I used to tell myself I was just being polite, just being a good neighbor. But now, When I heard her key in the lock at night, I felt relief. When her laugh came through the wall while she talked on the phone with a friend, it made me smile without thinking. We didn't announce anything to anyone. We didn't rush into labels. We just kept choosing each other in small, normal ways. On weekdays, our schedules didn't always match. I left early for deliveries. Some days I was carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs by 9 in the morning. Delia usually left later, dressed neatly, hair done, phone already in her hand. Sometimes I would see her as I came back for lunch, and she would wave from the entrance. Sometimes she would text me a simple question like, "Do you want me to pick something up?" And I would answer with something equally simple. It felt like a partnership forming quietly. One Friday evening, I came home sore and exhausted. My shirt smelled like cardboard and dust. I was halfway through taking my shoes off when I heard a light knock. Delia stood there holding a small paper bag. "I bought 2, she said. "I wasn't sure if you'd be home, but I guessed you would." Inside were 2 warm pastries from the bakery around the corner. It was such a small thing, but it hit me harder than any big gesture. She had thought of me during her day in a way that didn't feel forced. It felt natural, like I had a place in her mind now. We sat in my kitchen and ate them. We talked about nothing and everything. She told me about a difficult meeting at work and how she had to stay calm while 2 people argued like children. I told her about a client who insisted the furniture was missing pieces, only to find the screws in his own pocket. She laughed so hard she almost choked, then covered her mouth, embarrassed, and laughed even more. At some point, the laughter faded. Delia looked down at her hands and said quietly, "It's strange." "What is?" I asked. "How safe it feels," she said. Like my body finally stopped waiting for the next argument. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like a speech. So I just said the truth. "I'm glad." She nodded. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a confession. It was a decision. After that, things moved forward, still slowly, but with less uncertainty. She started staying over at my place some nights. Not every night. She still needed her own space, and so did I. But when she did, it felt normal. She would bring a small bag with her toothbrush and her charger and 1 extra shirt. She'd leave it by the door like she belonged there, because she did. The first time she fell asleep next to me, she did it carefully, like she expected something to go wrong. Her body stayed tense for a while, even though the room was quiet. I didn't try to pull her closer. I didn't try to prove anything. I just stayed still, breathing normally, letting the silence be safe. Eventually, her shoulders dropped. Her hand found mine in the dark. She slept. The next morning, she looked surprised to find herself smiling before she even spoke. We started cooking together more often. She was better at planning meals. I was better at handling the heavy pots and chopping without thinking. We figured out a rhythm. Sometimes we ate at her kitchen table, sometimes at mine, depending on who had the cleaner sink. We joked about being 2 apartments pretending to be one. One Sunday, we carried a few things from her place to mine. Not a full move. Just small items that made her feel comfortable. A soft blanket she liked. A mug with a chipped handle that she refused to throw away. A little plant she kept alive somehow, even with her busy schedule. She put it on my windowsill and adjusted it like it had always been there. "Now it looks like someone lives here," she said. "Someone does," I answered, and her eyes softened again. We also talked, more seriously, about what happened before. Not every detail, not in one big conversation, but in pieces. She told me that her relationship had been full of promises that never turned into actions. That she was always waiting, always hoping, always trying to explain what she needed in a way that wouldn't start a fight. She said it made her feel like she was asking for too much when she was really asking for basic respect. I told her I wasn't perfect, that I had my own flaws, that I could be quiet to the point of disappearing sometimes, especially when I was tired. But I also told her something I meant deeply, that I would never make her feel like her emotions were a problem she needed to hide. There were small challenges too, because real relationships have them. My job was physical and unpredictable. Some days I came home late because a client added extra work or a delivery was delayed. I would be frustrated and tired, and Delia could tell. She didn't take it personally, but she also didn't let me shut down completely. One evening I came home annoyed after a long day. I dropped my keys harder than necessary. Delia looked at me and said calmly, "Talk to me." I wanted to say, "It's nothing." I wanted to go silent. That was my old habit. But I didn't. I sat down and told her what happened, how the day felt endless, how my body hurt, how I hated feeling like I had no control over my time. She listened without fixing it. When I finished, she stood up and kissed my forehead lightly. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For not disappearing," she answered. That sentence stayed with me. A few weeks later, we ran into our neighbor from downstairs in the stairwell. She looked at us, then smiled knowingly. "You two seem happier lately," she said, not in a rude way, just observant. Delia blushed. I felt my ears get warm. We laughed awkwardly. After she left, Delia leaned closer and whispered, "Great. The building knows." I smiled. Let them. That was the first time I said it out loud, even to myself. I wasn't afraid of people seeing it. I wasn't afraid of what it meant. One night, Delia and I sat on the couch, tired from the week. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching. She rested her head against my shoulder. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked quietly. "The night I knocked?" I said. She nodded. "I keep thinking, if you hadn't, I don't know what I would have done. Not something dramatic, but I think I would have stayed stuck. I would have kept telling myself it was fine." I looked at her. "You would have gotten out eventually." "Maybe," she said. "But it was you. You made it real." I didn't want to turn it into something heavy. Still, I needed her to know the truth. "I didn't knock because I wanted something," I said. "I knocked because I couldn't sit there and pretend I didn't hear you hurting." Delia lifted her head and looked straight at me. "And now?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "Now I want you." Not in a dramatic way. Not as a line. As a simple, steady fact. Her eyes watered, just slightly. She smiled anyway. "Good," she said. "Because I'm not going back to being just your neighbor." I felt something in my chest loosen, like I had been holding my breath for months without realizing it. That night, as we got ready for bed, Delia left her small bag by my door like always. Then she paused, walked back, and put the bag inside my closet instead. "It's annoying to carry it back and forth," she said, trying to sound casual. I nodded, acting casual too. "Makes sense." But we both knew what it meant. We were still two people with two apartments and two jobs and two sets of habits. But we were building something real. Not loud. Not perfect. Just steady. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking at my life like a routine to survive. I was looking at it like a life I actually wanted. Life did not change overnight. It settled into something quieter and deeper, the kind of change you only notice when you stop and look back. Delia and I slowly stopped thinking in terms of mine and hers. Apartments, schedules, routines began to overlap without effort. Most mornings now started the same way. One of us would wake up first, usually me on workdays. I would move carefully, trying not to wake her, but she almost always stirred anyway. She would open her eyes, still half asleep, and smile when she saw me. That small moment became my favorite part of the day. I still worked long hours. Delivering furniture did not get easier just because life felt better. Some days were harder than others. Heavy wardrobes up narrow staircases. Clients who changed their minds at the last minute. Late evenings when my arms felt like they belonged to someone else. But coming home felt different now. It was no longer just a place to rest. It was a place where someone noticed if I was tired. Delia adjusted too. She was used to handling everything on her own, managing people at work, carrying responsibility without complaint. Being with me did not change her strength, but it allowed her to rest in a way she had not before. She stopped apologizing for needing quiet time. She stopped explaining herself so much. We talked about moving in together without making it dramatic. One evening, we were sitting on the floor of my living room, sorting laundry. She looked around and said, "I'm already here most of the time." I nodded and said, "So am I." That was the conversation. No speeches. No pressure. A few weeks later, we carried the rest of her things over. Clothes, books, files from work. It was not a big move. It felt like finishing something that had already started. Her apartment did not become empty right away. We kept it for a while, just in case. But emotionally, she was already home. Living together brought new details into focus. I learned how precise she was with planning, how she liked lists and structure. She learned how I needed silence after work before I could talk properly. Sometimes these differences caused small tension. Nothing dramatic. Just moments where we had to adjust. Once, I forgot to tell her I would be late. She waited with dinner ready, worried something had happened. When I walked in and saw her standing there, I realized how easily care can turn into fear. I apologized without excuses. She told me what she needed. We fixed it, not with promises, but with attention. We also learned how to support each other without losing ourselves. Delia encouraged me to take better care of my body, to rest when I needed to. I encouraged her to let go of work when she came home, even if just for an hour. We became better versions of ourselves, not because we were trying, but because we felt safe enough to be honest. One quiet Sunday afternoon, we talked about the future, not in terms of big dreams, but in practical ways, where we wanted to live long term, how we imagined our lives in 5 years. Children came up, not as a plan, but as a possibility. We did not rush the conversation. We let it be what it was. Open, calm, real. I realized then that I was no longer afraid of commitment. Not because it was easy, but because it felt shared. I was not carrying it alone. Delia changed too. She laughed more freely. She stopped checking her phone constantly. The past relationship became something she talked about without pain, just as a chapter that ended when it needed to. She said one night, "I didn't know life could be this quiet in a good way." I understood exactly what she meant. One evening, after dinner, she stood by the window, watching the city lights. I joined her. She leaned into me and said softly, "You know, sometimes I still think about that night." I did not need to ask which one. "It feels like that was the moment everything shifted," she added. I wrapped my arm around her. "It did," I said. "For me too." There was no dramatic turning point after that. Just days adding up. Trust growing stronger. Love becoming something steady, not fragile. Something built from shared mornings, difficult conversations, and the simple comfort of being seen. As time passed, the idea of marriage came up naturally. Not as pressure, not as an expectation, just as a next step that made sense. We talked about it openly, about what it meant to us, about what we wanted it to be and what we did not. I knew then that I did not want a grand gesture. I wanted something honest, something that reflected how we had built our relationship. Quietly, with intention, I started thinking about when and how, without telling anyone. Not even her. Not yet. It was not a secret filled with anxiety. It was a plan filled with calm certainty. At night, when Delia fell asleep next to me, her breathing slow and steady, I sometimes stayed awake a little longer. Not because I was worried, but because I was grateful. Grateful that a simple knock on a door had led to a life that finally felt like home. I knew I was going to ask Delia to marry me long before I actually said the words. It was not a sudden decision. It was something that settled in me quietly, the same way everything else between us had. No pressure, no doubt, just certainty. I planned it in a way that felt right for us. Nothing public, nothing loud. I did not want an audience. I wanted a moment that belonged only to the two of us. It happened on an ordinary evening. I came home earlier than usual, which was already unusual enough for her to notice. She asked if everything was okay. I said yes, and it was the truth. More than okay. I cooked dinner that night, something simple but familiar. While I worked in the kitchen, Delia sat at the table, talking about her day, unaware of how carefully I was holding my nerves together. After we ate, we stayed at the table longer than usual. The apartment was quiet. The city sounds outside were distant and soft. I reached for her hand, and she looked at me, sensing the shift before I even spoke. I told her I did not have a long speech, that I was not good with dramatic words. I told her what I knew instead, that my life had been steady before her, but it had not felt full. That knocking on her door that night was not courage, but instinct. That loving her did not feel like effort, but like alignment. Then I asked her to marry me. She did not answer right away. She covered her mouth with her hand, eyes filling with tears she did not try to stop. She nodded before she spoke, as if her body already knew the answer. Then she said yes, quietly, firmly, without hesitation. We sat there for a long time after that, holding each other, letting the reality settle. There was no rush to call anyone, no immediate announcements. Just us, breathing, smiling, understanding that something permanent had just been chosen. We told people slowly. Her friends first, then mine. Her parents. Mine. Everyone reacted the way people do when something makes sense. No shock. Just happiness. A few comments about how calm we both seemed. That was true. We were calm, because we were sure. Planning the wedding was simple. We did not want anything complicated. A small ceremony. Close people. A place that felt warm and honest. Delia was precise, as always, but she did not obsess. I helped where I could, even when my solutions were not always elegant. We learned again how to compromise, how to listen, how to laugh when things were not perfect. On the day of the wedding, I woke up early. Not from nerves, but from habit. Delia was still asleep beside me. I watched her for a moment, remembering the woman who once stood behind a door with tired eyes and a guarded heart. The woman next to me now was peaceful, open, certain. The ceremony was exactly what we wanted. No excess, no performance. When Delia walked toward me, I did not feel overwhelmed. I felt grounded, like everything had led here naturally. We exchanged vows that were simple and honest. Promises about presence, respect, and choosing each other even on difficult days. When we said yes again, this time in front of witnesses, it did not feel like a beginning. It felt like confirmation. Afterward, we celebrated quietly. Good food, soft music, conversations that did not need to be loud to be meaningful. I watched Delia talk with my mother, laugh with my coworkers, exist comfortably in the life we were building together. There was no doubt left anywhere. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, we returned to the apartment. The same building, the same hallway, the same door I had knocked on months before. Only now, everything behind those walls was different. Delia took off her shoes and leaned against the wall, smiling tiredly. "Do you ever think about how close we were to never becoming this?" she asked. "All the time," I answered honestly. She walked over and rested her forehead against mine. "I'm glad you knocked," she said. "So am I," I replied. Life after that did not turn into a perfect story. It turned into a real one. Work days, responsibilities, small disagreements, shared victories. But every night, when we locked the door and turned off the lights, there was no loneliness left in the space between us. We were no longer neighbors. We were partners. We were family. We were home.